Other top story this morning, President Trump continues to defend his pardons for all of the January 6 rioters. The president last night downplayed the violence against police officers that day in the first Oval Office interview of his new term. Take a listen.
Number of reasons. Number one, they were in there for 3.5 years, a long time. Right. And in many solitary confinement, treated like nobody's ever been treated so badly. They were treated like the worst criminals in history. And you know what they were there for? They were protesting the vote because they knew the election was rigged and they were protesting the vote. And that you should be allowed to protest a vote. You should be allowed to. You know, when the day comes...
You shouldn't be able to invade the Capitol.
No, ready? Most of the people were absolutely innocent. Okay, but forgetting all about that, these people have served horribly a long time. It would be very, very cumbersome to go and look. You know how many people we're talking about? 1,500 people. Almost all of them should not have been. This should not have happened. And the other thing is this: some of those people with the police, true, but they were very minor incidents. Okay, you know they get built up by that couple of fake guys that are on CNN all the time.
Nobody watches.
They were very minor incidents. And it was time. You had 1,500 people that suffered. That's a lot of people. You know, they were looking for new people 2 weeks ago. They were looking, wait a minute, they were looking to charge new people. They have a woman who's 76 years old that they said made a statement that was a little bit out of line years after the fact. This was a political hoax. And you know what? Those people, and I'm not saying in every single case, but there was a lot of patriotism with those people.
So, Sam Stein, you just heard it in the friendly confines of a Sean Hannity Oval Office interview. Donald Trump continues to downplay what happened there, suggesting that officers were exaggerating their injuries. We had Michael Fanone on our air yesterday talk about how he suffered a heart attack, went into cardiac arrest, was beaten within an inch of his life. We talked about how members there, some of the rioters would use flagpoles, baseball bats, whatever it might be, the cops' own weapons, their batons, to attack them. And yet, this, for Donald Trump, seems to be closing the book after 4 years of, in his mind, a successful effort to downplay what we're seeing right there on our screens.
I mean, obviously, it's ridiculous and insulting to the officers who went through that traumatic ordeal. Several officers took their lives. I don't consider that minor in the slightest. I don't think anyone would objectively consider that minor. Should note that it was interesting to see Hannity kind of sheepishly say, you shouldn't be able to invade the Capitol, right? Of course you shouldn't be able to invade the Capitol. That's it goes without saying. But this is Trump at his, peak, right? He wants to erase this part of history. And I'm not, honestly, nothing about it surprises me. I think the more interesting, more surprising element of this was Mike Johnson. Which the video will be played, which is Mike Johnson sort of saying, well, let's just move on. That's in the past. We don't need to relitigate this. Let's go forward. And then hours later, launching an investigative committee in Congress to investigate the preceding days of January 6th and the success and what happened after January 6th, basically investing the investigators. And so they are trying to recast this entire history. It begins with Trump's blanket pardons, which in that interview, he said it would have been too cumbersome to go through individual cases, so just do all 1,500. And then it continues into the use of congressional resources, congressional authorities to try to cast doubt on the prosecution, the legitimate prosecution of the people who rioted, who tried to stop the peaceful transfer of power. It is a deliberate and comprehensive attempt to try to rewrite one of the darker chapters of our political history.
Well, we've seen before when Congress and others have tried to investigate the investigators regarding Trump administration. It never ends well for those investigating the investigators. And in this case, you better believe that if you open this door back up and you really want to go back to January the 6th and you were a supporter of Donald Trump, you're going to not only see this, you're going to see cops, as the Wall Street Journal called them, cop beaters. You're going to see the people that walked free after beating the hell out of cops, after doing things that led to the death of several cops. Talk to their families; they'll tell you that. You'll hear more people like Michael Fanone, who went to work that day to do their job to protect the United States Capitol, who had the hell beaten out of them. They were kicked, they were tased, and by these people that were bragging. They were bragging about beating the hell out of law enforcement officers. So the elevation of cop beaters, by Mike Johnson saying, oh, listen, let's not focus on the cop beaters. Let's focus on the Biden pardons. You know, good luck with that. It's just not going to end well. It's really not. No. It's not going to end well for Republicans. It's not going to end well for the White House. David Drucker, let's talk though about the impact and the blowback on this. I've already talked about how the Wall Street Journal editorial page was sufficiently shocked at clemency for cop beaters. And there were about half a dozen Republicans that came out yesterday in the Senate and actually condemned this, said it was a bad thing to do. They wouldn't do it. That said, from Republicans I spoke to, and I'm really curious what you heard, whether they said it in front of microphones or not, there was a deep, abiding unease all across the Capitol yesterday among Republicans, seeing that some of the worst actually got to walk free after beating the hell out of law enforcement officers.
Yeah, look, I mean, how often is there a deep, abiding unease about something Donald Trump says or does? And it really doesn't matter. He campaigned on this. He said he was going to do this. This is not shocking. And all that matters politically is what do voters think? And voters voted for him anyway. So I'm not saying it doesn't matter, and I am not saying people shouldn't be upset. But this is not going to surprise anybody. And it's the sort of thing that could end up blowing back on Trump if the things he was really elected to do, which is get the border under control and improve the economy by bringing down inflation, bringing down costs. I mean, these are things that voters really want from him, not all of this other stuff. If he gets that wrong, then it becomes death by 1,000 cuts. And it's like, oh, you did this and you did that. But all of these things were very well known. So this is not to excuse it, but just to point out politically, this is not going to be a shock to the system or a shock to the public, nor is it a shock to Republicans. They knew he would do this, and they have been okay with this because their voters have been okay with this. And look, we could end up being wrong. There could be some sort of immediate, pushback broadly throughout the country. But everybody knows who Donald Trump is at this point. They've listened to him for almost a decade. And I'd be surprised if initially there was a big uproar.
Well, Mika, this is what you've been saying is he campaigned on this. He promised to do this. I mean, the only caveat to that, of course, is talking about doing it by case-by-case basis. J.D. Vance saying, no, we're not going to let the violent criminals out, the ones that beat up the cops. And we heard that from a lot of Republicans. But that is a caveat to a much bigger campaign thing where he glorified throughout the campaign the January 6th rioters. Voters knew he was glorifying them, calling them patriots, and they voted for him and elected him. So David makes a very good point.
And not only did he campaign on this, this is his right. As hard as it is to say, this is his right as president. And yesterday I was reading a lot about this and watching the coverage, and I was seeing reporters getting into huge fights with Republican congressmen, and they just kept going around in circles because, of course, Donald Trump kept his word and Joe Biden did not. That's also true. And so that's the trap. Reporters are going to get in. They're going to go round in circles. That's only going to feed into the negative narrative about the media. It's going to do nothing to prove a point about this. Nothing. It actually may undermine it. And Mara Gay, I feel like editorial writers need to step up. Democrats need to step up. Voices like Michael Fanone's need to be heard. I was listening to him all day, and we had him on the show yesterday. Gripping and absolutely to the point of the problem here. And so there's a role here for those who need to step up. And by the way, I would really hope that some Republicans would step up. But again, there are some potholes here that I think the media falls into, and we can't let that happen, because there are some realities about this that are undeniable. It is his right, and he promised. And then there's the counter narrative, which is also undeniable. Joe Biden promised that he would not pardon his son or his family, and he did. And he also pardoned others who have done things, and it's extremely muddled, and it's not a fight that I think, personally, reporters and hosts want to get in to have moments. I really don't. I think we're getting in the way of things. So I'm looking at this from a coverage perspective to someone who works at the New York Times.
I think that's exactly the right question. During Trump's first term, there was a lot of, both on the part of the Democratic Party and even from voters in the media, there was kind of a grasping at normalcy.
Yes.
So an attempt to excuse away, to minimize some of what Donald Trump was not only doing in office, but said that he was about. It was clear that he was not committed to democracy. But there was a lot of kind of hand-holding of Donald Trump. Well, surely you want to actually support democracy.
Right.
Surely you couldn't mean the things that you're saying. And I think this is a moment where the opposition, and that is not just the Democratic Party, but that's any American who's committed to democracy, has to look at this and say, this is about raw power. Mm-hmm. And this is a man who promised some really shocking things that are destructive to our democracy, and he is delivering on them.
Yeah.
There is no excusing it away. And I think the other moment, the pardons are one moment. The Nazi salute from Elon Musk was another.
Yep.
So this is a challenge to not excuse away, not minimize, to call a spade a spade.
But cover it, and those who should call a spade, especially Republicans and Democrats in Washington, editorial writers, victims, ultimately, Americans will have to see what is happening here as he delivers on his promises, and they will decide whether or not this is what they really wanted. I do talk to a lot of people who voted for Trump who don't think these things would have happened. So I wonder where that leads.